Well, ladies and gentlemen, members of the American Council, guests, all of you, I have a special responsibility this evening. You know, this organization was created with a really important mission. You've already heard that. It was created in the aftermath of World War II. And the inspiration really came from a little-known but determined American activist, an activist for freedom named one Chris Emmett. And he had a big idea: bring American business and academic leaders together with their counterparts in the brand new Federal Republic of Germany, and it could help promote the common interest in restoring a peaceful and prosperous relationship among the two countries. Well, with the support of John McCloy, who was then U.S. High Commissioner in Germany, as Henry's mentioned, helped by the binational Erich Warburg, later General Lucius Clay, who happened to be architect of the Berlin Airlift. I don't recall that Henry Kissinger was there, not physically anyway. No doubt he was there in spirit as a graduate student at Harvard. But among those people, the American Council in Germany was born, and it encouraged studies, sponsored meetings of officials of the new Germany, including eventually Willy Brandt and Helmut Kohl and others, hosted joint meetings with the new German counterpart, the Atlantic Brooker. But if the truth be told, with the passing of Chris Emmett and the aging of John McCloy, who had been the long-serving chairman, the sense of energy and momentum was lost. I'll tell you, when we had an annual meeting of the American Council on Germany in those days, we might have used one of these round tables. But fortunately, along that time, in the early 1970s, before I became involved, new leadership appeared. The Ford Foundation encouraged a young Harvard professor of German history, one Richard Hunt, to become involved. And truly involved he has been. For more than 40 years, Rick has served faithfully as voluntary president and then vice chairman of the council's board, altogether virtually half of his life. He almost single-handedly turned the organization around. He professionalized the place. He had the appointment of the first of a succession of strong full-time presidents, of which Steve Sokol is the latest embodiment. He succeeded in attracting well-known chairs following Jack McCloy, Senator Mac Mathias, General John Calvin, Garrett Utley, and now Bob Kimmitt. The biennial German-American Young Leaders Conference was created. Membership in the organization took off as finances were strengthened. It had a renewed sense of purpose. The fact is, the world of the Council has come a very long way from nurturing post-war reconciliation, a long way toward active participation in the critically important relationship between the two strongest free and democratic societies in the world of today. Now, I know about that Renaissance because I happened to be there. I could see it. Captivated like others by the strength of Rick Hunt's conviction. Now, more than a decade ago, the Council recognized that reality by initiating in his honor the Richard M. Hunt Fellowship for the Study of German Politics, Society, and Culture. That's quite a mouthful, justified only by the wide range of Rick's scholarly interests. Now, I should acknowledge that the American Council in Germany has not been Professor Hunt's only preoccupation. For one thing, he's been able to rise beyond his education at Yale and Columbia to become a distinguished professor at Harvard. But not only a distinguished professor, Rick Hunt was a living image of the place. Chief Marshal for the entire university. He served for decades, presiding over convocations, commencements, and other official Harvard festivities. All those activities that carry a great sense of tradition. They are marked by elaborate ceremonies and historic regalia. Now, we here at the American Council can't duplicate all of that. We can't duplicate the crimson robes, the symbolic mace of a Harvard graduation, but we can, in a quiet way, celebrate the enormous contributions that Richard M. Hunt, for more than a half a century, has made to the American Council in Germany. Rick, if you make your way up here, it's time to present you with our Lifetime Allegiant Achievement Award. Not the matching that mace you used to carry and all those things. Not quite so elaborate, but it comes with feeling and gratitude. I'll pick it up in a minute. I don't want to drop it. But this is a bridge, and it's a tribute broadly to the enduring relationship of nations, two nations that together demonstrate the value of free, stable, and open societies in a troubled world, and that is the organization that you nurtured so carefully.
So another old guy, I hope it's the last. Oh. So thank you, Paul Volcker. Your words mean a lot to me at my late life stage. I well remember the day in 1984 when you received your honorary degree at Harvard University and then went on to deliver your commencement address to 25,000 alumni, parents, and students. And this evening, it certainly pleases me to hear the words of a very successful two-term, 8-year chairman of the Federal Reserve. And thank you to Bob Kimmitt, chairman, and Steve Sokol, president of the American Council. You both have shown very strong leadership in making the Council a major transatlantic organization. So for more than 57 years, the American Council on Germany has been a very important part of my life. And I hope to keep it that way for the foreseeable future. And when I reflect on my years with the Council, I can go back to some of the early days of the organization and ponder its origin. What prompted the founding of the Council in 1952? Who were the founders of the Council, and what were they thinking as they created such an organization? Perhaps this is a subject worth a few minutes reflection. The fateful year 1952. Think back to that momentous time in world history. It was clearly a critical and also an extremely bleak time in European history. The terrible convulsions of World War I and then World War II had all led to unimaginable deaths, devastations, and disruptions in Europe and in Germany. The knowledge of the Holocaust continued to appall the world. Germany, defeated and numb, existed in the ruins of its cities. Most of Central Europe lay prostrate between the United States and the Soviet Union. And the Cold War had begun with a vengeance. Heightening the tensions between the two antagonists was the fact that both of the contending nations possessed menacing nuclear weapons. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there was no assurance that these weapons would not be used again. It was exactly at this moment in history that the American Council was formed by a small number of Americans and Germans with a will and a hope to make a difference in the relations between the two nations that all too recently had been fierce enemies. Could any American organization really hope to form new ties with Germany? Just a brief personal note, in the 1950s, I was a young graduate student in Munich, where I was completing a Harvard PhD dissertation on the Nazi period. In 1959, I had been invited to attend the Council's biennial conference in Bad Godesberg on the Rhine. And it was there that I first met most of the Americans and Germans who had founded the American Council on Germany and its German counterpart, the Atlantic Brücke. At that meeting, I began to understand, I think, what was in their minds and their intentions as they created the organization. First of all, and it is sometimes forgotten, from the very beginning, the founders of the Council and their colleagues in Germany decided to form two organizations. One, the American Council on Germany, located in New York, and the other, the Atlantic Brücke, first in Hamburg and later in Berlin. Incidentally, I want to mention that Evelyn Metzen is here this evening, and she is the current executive director of the Atlantic Brücke, and I'm very happy that she is here with us. In the German language, our two organizations have traditionally referred to each other as Schwestern, or sisters, separate but equal in the same family. Of course, with different programs, different boards of directors, separate budgets, each financed by different sources. But both organizations were devoted to a common mission to strengthen understanding and ties between the two great countries of America and Germany in the post-war world. Clearly, after all that had happened in the war years, it was an act of faith for both the American and German founders to believe that these two organizations could work together to promote the peaceful interests of two nations that only, and think about this, only 7 years before had been the most bitter of enemies, fighting in the most terrible war in history. In the end, it was that faith that after much hard work and considerable turmoil and some disappointments, did bring about some remarkable and lasting reconciliations between these two nations. So who were the German founders and who were their German counterparts in 1952? Many of them were not well known, others were national figures. First, on the German side, and Paul has already mentioned this, was this extraordinary man, Christopher Emmett, a visionary private citizen. It was he who first had the idea for an American Council on Germany, composed of influential citizens who would work for a new Germany in a new Europe. In the mid-1930s, Emmett had helped to found the Christian Committee to boycott Nazi Germany. In many ways, it was the forerunner of the Council because it was dedicated to fight the war for freedom, and especially for German freedom, long before the military hostilities of World War II had begun. Later on, after the war, it was Christopher Emmett who convinced the U.S. High Commissioner in Germany, John McCloy, that two organizations, one American, one German, should carry out the work of political and social reconciliation between both nations. All of this was managed by this intensely private man, Christopher Emmett. He never took the position of president of the council, but he worked out of his home apartment at 901 Lexington Avenue here in New York City, and he devoted his life and career to defend the principle of freedom. And for Germany, this meant the freedom from totalitarian foes, first Nazism and later communism. Who were the other leaders of the two organizations? On the American side, from the beginning, they were banker Eric Warburg, lawyer Joseph Kaskell, professors Karl Brandt from Harvard, C.J. Friedrich, and then author and publicist Norbert Mühlen, U.S. General Lucius Clay, who orchestrated the Berlin airlift, Louis Lochner, who was AP journalist and bureau chief in Berlin, the president of Hunter College, George Schuster, and then, of course, Mrs. Ellen McCloy. On the German side, from the early years were Marion Gräfin Dönhoff, leading journalist at Die Zeit, CDU politicians Erich Blumenfeld and Kurt Bierenbach, and SPD leaders Willy Brandt and Helmut Schmidt. There were others that joined in later, including many who would become future German chancellors. Well, what were these leaders thinking and proposing as they discussed what would be done by the two organizations beginning a new and vital American connection? Here's what I remember about their thinking, and let me sum it up in three specific themes. First of all, the founders believed that no one must ever forget what had happened in the two great World War periods, 1914 to 1945. In German, the words nie vergessen, never forget, must always be remembered. In this case, all that had happened on both sides, German and American, in this new 30 years war could be etched in some evocative words. Just think of the words in this period. Verdun, Versailles, war guilt, the atrocities of World War II, the bombing of London and Coventry, and also Hamburg and Dresden, Nuremberg rallies, and the Nuremberg trials. All of these and much more must never be forgotten. To the contrary, these organizations were dedicated to the future depended on an abiding remembrance of the past and an effort to come to terms with it. Second, never again, or in German, nie wieder. This meant that whatever had happened in the first half of the 20th century should never be permitted to happen again. After such tempests and turmoils, life should begin anew with new ideas, new efforts for peace, new visions of the future by new and more democratic leaders. And third and last, it was an imperative for both Germans and Americans both to begin a determined search for new paths to reconciliation with each other. Steve Sokol has suggested I use the word Versöhnung, and it's perhaps the right word for reconciliation between peoples and parts of their past. These then were some of the long ago thoughts and motivations of Americans and Germans who founded the Council and the Brücke. Very quickly, their visions were embodied in a variety of exchange programs, conferences, local city centers, and that have undeniably, I think, helped to bring our two countries closer together in recent decades. Also not to be forgotten in guiding the work of the Council are the distinguished chairmen that have led our organizations. Paul mentioned some of them, but just remember again, lawyer and diplomat John McCloy, Maryland Senator Charles Mathias, NATO Supreme Allied Commander General John Galvin, former anchor for NBC Television News Garrick Utley, and now U.S. Ambassador Robert Kimmen. These names indeed constitute a remarkable group of leaders for our organizations. Finally, I want to say a few words about some other memorable people who have devoted a considerable part of their lives to the Council. Over the years, they have become friends. Sarah Ann Fagan, longtime administrator for Christopher Emmett. She even predated me at the Council in the early years. Karen Fury has had a 36-year career at the Council, and she is still at her desk here in New York City. Finally, I want to mention my longtime Harvard friend, Guido Goldman, a legendary institution builder, director of the Council, and gifted fundraiser. There are probably few anywhere who who can compare their careers with Guido Goldman's when it comes to building bridges between Germany and America. Many of you know that it was Guido Goldman who was largely responsible for the creation of both Harvard's Center for European Studies and the German Marshall Fund in Washington. In the 1970s and 80s, to support our programs, he helped the Council to negotiate significant funds from the German government and also from the Krupp Foundation. And infusions of large amounts of financial support were extremely important in the 1980s and the 1980s and 90s growth of the American Council of Germany's programs. So in the end, for my words, I hope you can see that I personally feel deeply privileged to be associated with and honored now by an organization that has had such a membership and such a record. What about the future of the American Council? I predict it will continue to go and grow in the years ahead. But surely I must be careful here. Long ago, the wise sage and baseball legend Yogi Berra cautioned everyone, never make any predictions, especially about the future. Nevertheless, I will make this prediction about the future. In the years ahead, working with the Atlantic Brücke and other organizations, the Council will create new programs, develop new ties under its present leadership between our two countries, and enable both Germany and America to live at last in a better world with better memories of the past and stronger hopes for a more peaceful future. Thank you very much.